Thank you, Garrett. I appreciate these works that we do on Thursday evenings because I get to listen to somebody besides myself as much as I like to listen to myself. Today's texts, Ezekiel 30 and 31, 2 Kings 25, Jeremiah 39 and 40, parts of. Two prophecies against Egypt first, and then Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem and a little bit of the aftermath. And then Nebuchadnezzar treats Jeremiah kindly and God treats Ebed-Melech kindly. That's what we may cover today. All of this takes place sometime in 586. It might be 587, it might be 585. It's all within a few months of each other. So this is where we are. The siege is kind of over. It's accomplished its work. And the total destruction and the third deportation. And then we'll have 50 years until the return. Questions? Anyone? Questions, comments, answers? George Bosworth has answers. George.
No, I've got questions.
Whens, whose, and what's? One of my favorite questions.
In the so the 9th day of the 4th month, 11th year of the reign of Zedekiah, Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, you did the same thing I did.
What?
You have your verses.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Wait. Let me move, because I fixed it. Yeah, Lee was a mess. 7th day, 1st month, 11th year of... I don't know who it is here. Instead, I've got questions. I filled out my first questions for your second text.
Okay, I'm really confused. Did I...
Up in your heading,
Yeah.
3 lines there. You have bold, bold, and not bold. There's a whole lot of verse numbers right there.
Yep.
And both George and I apparently both read 2 Kings and assumed, and then jumped down to whens, whose, and what's.
Okay.
So hopefully I answered questions.
I apologize with the confusing bolding. Okay, so I'll answer this question. So when's, whose, and what's? So the first month, the 7th day of the 11th year, and I wasn't going to bring this up now. Actually, I was going to bring this up now, and then I wasn't, and now I am bringing this up now. It's not very important, but so Ezekiel takes his timing from when? Anybody remember? The second his deportation. So that would be the end of the reign of Jehoiakim, or end of Jehoiakim, end of Jehoiakim, where he's taken off to Babylon. So the 11th year since, you could say the 11th year of the reign of Zedekiah, although that's not exactly accurate, but it's close enough. Jeremiah in this section is taking his from the reign of Zedekiah. So that will be the same. And then if you remember reading in 2 Kings, it'll say in the what year of Nebuchadnezzar?
Nebuchadnezzar's reign, right?
Yeah, the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So we've got different dates, different measurings. And I was going to say to you, so I'm sorry if there's chaos created here, but I'm not the one that did it. However, a good teacher should be able to reduce the level of chaos, right? All right, so in the first month of the 7th, the first day of the 7th month in the 11th year, the third day of the first, no, that's wrong. The first month, 7th day, 11th year, third month, first day, 11th year. Egypt is broken, and Pharaoh is like Assyria, and that is dead. So whose, when's, and what's? That was fun. My second favorite question I've ever asked, what's with they's knows? John Bosworth, did you get this by any chance?
God is Lord.
Yeah, God is Lord, Jehovah, right? They will know all small caps Lord, which meant more than what it means to us now. Okay, that's good enough for those questions. Put them aside. We'll come back to the next chapter when we get there. All right, so here we are in Ezekiel 25 through 32. This section of Ezekiel is the foes of Ezekiel. Tyre and Sidon and Ammon and Edom, and now 2 for Egypt. Against Egypt again. Because this is not the first time that God has spoken against Egypt in our chronological study of the prophets. It's not the first time. In fact, he did in chapter 29, right? Yeah, in chapter 29. Here we are in chapter 30, and he's talking about Egypt again. Now, I have enough material to monologue you right into sleep tonight. So, please interrupt me with your thoughts that will be valid and from the text. Ezekiel 30, verse 20 through 26 is broken up 2 ways, really. Egypt's last stand and the passing of the power to Babylon. That's what we're reading here. Ezekiel 30, 20. In the 11th year, the 1st month, the 7th of the month. That makes it something like April 29th, 586. Okay? Something like that. On the 7th of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And behold, it has not been bound up for healing or wrapped with a bandage, that it may be strong to hold the sword. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and will break his arms, both the strong and the broken. And I will make the sword fall from his hand. I will scatter the Egyptians among the nations, and disperse them among the lands. For I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon, and I will put my sword in his hand, and I will break the arms of Pharaoh, so that he will groan before him with groanings of a wounded man. Thus I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon, but the arms of Pharaoh will fall. Then they will know that I am the Lord, when I put my sword into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he stretches it out against the land of Egypt. When I scatter the Egyptians among the nations and disperse them among the lands, then they will know that I am the Lord. 3 things from this text impress me. The first thing is God's control over the nations. That's what this is. That's what's behind this. God controls the nations. We have the song that we sing, He's got the whole world in His hands. Now we sing that about comfort. He's got you and me, brother, in His hand. And we can take comfort from that. But part of that is, He's got the whole world in His hands. And He's controlling the whole world. Now, I have a pretty tough time controlling myself. Much less my family. Much less any other community that I'm a part of. And if you haven't noticed it, in the last few years, America has been pretty poor at trying to control what's going on, not only in other countries, but in and of itself. It's just impossible to do. We don't have as much control as we'd like to think we do. And when we recognize that, it makes us appreciate that God does. God has control. So, for the one who has the whole world in his hands, how should we react to him?
Be on his good side?
Yeah.
Be on his good side. Be on his good side. Yeah, that's what this whole thing's about. You better be on his good side. Anybody else? Any other? Obey him. I would say also, let's not forget to what? Trust him. Somebody's horn is beeping out there. I don't know if it's somebody in this family or this congregation. Trust God. Right. He's got the whole world in his hands. And so you read the text and you see what he's done and all the chaos, and you say, wow, if he controlled that, if he knew what was going on, I guess I'll just trust him. And when he says to Lee, hey, Lee, this is what you need to do here, well, guess what? I get paid from here down, don't I, compared to God? I'm impressed that this downfall, Egypt, until now, what was the world power? Actually, Assyria has actually come and gone by the time we're reading this right now. And Babylon is the world power right now. But before now, what was the world power? For thousands of years, it was Egypt. And they fell. Now, do you think there was an Egyptian, at least one, who was saddened by the fall of Egypt? Do you think that if America fell, could it happen to us? I'll tell you right now, I would be sad. I would be. And I'm thinking that everybody in here would be actually a little bit. Maybe some of us to varying degrees, but I would be sad because the nation that I have come to love, although maybe you could question why I love it, but this nation that I grew up here, I would be sad about it, right? Is there a kingdom that will never fall? So, okay, and in fact, I think God uses that. Look, don't fall in love with your nation for the wrong reasons. But God has put it in us that we will fall in love to some degree with what we were brought up with. And he uses that to say, guess what? That's going to go away. But you can have the real thing forever. Daniel chapter 2, which, by the way, was written before what we're reading now, or I don't know if it was written before. It was delivered before. Daniel chapter 2, verse 44 says, I think it's 44, yeah. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Hebrews chapter 12 talks about a nation that cannot be destroyed. Matthew 16 talks about this kingdom. So you can have a part of that. The third thing that impresses me is when this is written, or delivered, I should say, not written, but when it's delivered, in the 11th year, which is something like 586 BC. 586 BC, he says, I've taken power from Egypt and put it in the hand of Babylon. For how long will Babylon be the power?
Not terribly.
Not long.
Yeah.
50 years. If it's 586, then in 539, Cyrus is going to take over. I'm pretty impressed by that it's only 50 years. This emphasizes that kings come and they go. They come and they go. But the King of Kings, who's got the whole world in his hand, is always present. So that's the king we want to pay our allegiance to. Comments, questions? Dad.
I have in a book at home, I have a copy of a letter that was written by, you probably know, somebody knows, a Christian of some persuasion, when Rome fell, Rome, sitting the empire in 476, whatever, he was also a Roman. He was a patriot.
Yep.
He wasn't a Jew. And basically his letter was, I can't believe it happened to us. And he had Daniel.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I can't believe it happened to us, the greatest nation in the world, with the relatives, you know, well, the Visigoths and all
Oh,
those
yeah.
guys. Yeah, so it happened to them.
Yep. Yeah.
It happens to everybody.
Yeah, it seems like it will happen to everybody. That's we're a little too confident when we say it will happen to everybody. But the general idea is they come and they go, and right now we're up, and likely we'll probably be down sometime. I read a politician wrote the other day, the downfall is coming. Or no. We're in the beginning of the downfall now. And I was thinking, I mean, I'm not that old, but I think you missed it by like 50 years or something. We've been in the downfall, buddy. George Bosworth?
My comment is basically the same. Name a country that was the greatest that still
Right.
is.
That's still right.
There's got to be something about the human condition, though, that
Prompts that.
yeah. The other day, Ron and I were watching the news, and they're interviewing some guy that lives on Kilauea. Okay.
Where?
On the volcano that is erupting in Hawaii.
Oh.
And it's gone and swallowed his house and everything else. And he says right in front of the camera, never in a million years did I ever think that volcano's been erupting for 30 years out there. You know, where have you been? Have you just been stoned the whole time or something?
Yeah.
It's like, you're on a volcano anyway.
Yeah.
Never thought it could happen to me.
Well, Lee,
Yes, Gary.
one of the things that kind of jumped on me is this isn't the first time Egypt fell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were a great world power. God showed them what? You will know who I am.
Yeah.
You will know. And you know, I mean, yeah, it's been several hundred years, but God's got to show them again.
Again. Right. He's got to show the saddest part is, who does he have to show again? His own people. Yeah, I mean, everybody gets to learn it again, has to learn it again, but it's so sad that his own people have to, yeah.
And even the disciples don't have that eternal focus, even when Jesus ascends into heaven.
Right.
Asking about when he's going to restore the kingdom of Israel.
Yeah, they're trying to figure it out.
They still don't get it.
Dispensational premillennial literalist John MacArthur on Ezekiel 30:21. First of all, what is the literalist? The dispensational premillennial. The premillennial believes that there will be a future reign of Jesus, literally fulfilled in Jerusalem on the earth. He's going to come back and sit on David's literal throne. He's the premillennial for at the beginning of 1,000 years, right? He's the dispensational part. I could have left that out, but that has to do with different covenants. There are premillennialists who are not dispensationalists. Let's not get into that too much. He gets this conclusion from a literalist hermeneutic approach to interpreting the Bible. What is that? What is this literalist approach? Anyone? Literal approach. Yep.
Prophecies are literal when you want them to
Ah. Remember the last key right there. When you want them to be. But forget that. You know what this means? It means Jonathan's been studying, and if he's gotten any of that from any of the classes that I've ever led, then I'm pretty excited right there, because that's the key right there. But let's forget that. The second part, they're literal. Prophecy is literal. It's literal. What do you mean literal?
He says there is a dragon that's going to swoop the stars of heaven and cast them into a hole on the earth. That is literal.
Right.
I'd like to see that happen.
So you take the grammar and you read it, and as it is written is what it means. It will historically be fulfilled the way the grammar says. Historical, grammatical, literal translation. These are those words. Okay. Another key. Whoa, something's going on here. I can't have that. So another key. This is when you look him up and say, hey, how does he say this all happens, comes together? A literal hermeneutic is the exegetical key on which premillennialism rests. A literal hermeneutic consistently applied leads to premillennialism. Yes. So you take the historical, grammatical reading, and whenever you read the whole Bible, that's the way you read it. And when you read it that way, you'll get to premillennialism. What do you think he says? Verse 21. Verse 21. Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Verse 22 again. I am against Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and I will break his arms. So, there it is. You take the historical, grammatical reading of that, and what will happen? 2 broken arms. The strong one and the weak one. Do you think that's what the historical, grammatical, literal premillennialist says about this text? God figuratively depicted his act from taking power from Egypt through Nebuchadnezzar. The point is, as Jonathan nailed it on the head, they are literal when they want to be, and not literal. And the point is, another point is, do they see it? Yes, they do. They do see it. The question is being consistent or not. And I'm not saying I am Mr. Consistent, but we need to work toward that. No, we see it here. The question is somewhere else. Can God use figurative language in prophecy? Yes. We go right here, we turn there, and we see it, and even they admit it. Okay, that's the point of that. Comments or questions on this? Yes, Jonathan.
This top quote there with figuratively, I assume that's something he's written.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it's right here.
Okay, so, I mean, it's not like an obscure recording of a private conversation on YouTube.
No.
He's put that out there.
That's right there.
So, what is the point at which someone says, so here you say everything's literal, right here you've written figuratively, is that where they stick their fingers in the
here and say, and don't think.
Yes, they will. They're like the thing that you can't push down and it squeezes out like cockroaches. No, you get the idea. You can't get them and hold them in one spot. My wife thought that's funny. I'd like to keep you right here, but as soon as you do that, whoop, it goes over there. Yes, it's inconsistency, right? Yeah, and it's out there. So the point is, when we're examining when Lee Tossi is examining, do I think I know that, do I have this text? Just start talking, Lee. Just start talking about that text, your thoughts. And like Lee does, Lee writes them down. And if you're right, you will never find an inconsistency. But if you're wrong, sometime you'll find an inconsistency. And so I use that when I'm talking to myself, which happens all the time. And when you're out there with the false teacher, let him go. Let him go. And then it won't take long before you find the inconsistency. Speaking of inconsistencies in John MacArthur, he's a Calvinist. What does a Calvinist believe? Tulip. What is tulip? Total hereditary depravity, unlimited, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints. What does the Calvinist, unconditional election, what does the Calvinist believe about baptism? It's a condition, so it's not, well, that was confusing what I just said, right? They do not believe it's a condition, right? We believe it's a condition. No, it is not. You are already saved before you are. Okay, so down here, right, and we can read from here. I'll just turn to one real quick. I don't mean to pick on him, but it's just easy. Mark 16:16. It does not teach that baptism saves. Acts 2. This might be better translated because of the remission of sin. Baptism does not produce forgiveness and cleansing from sin. So on and so forth. You get the point. No, it's not baptism. It's not baptism. It's not baptism. So what is baptism? Christian baptism by immersion is the solemn and beautiful testimony. Now this is clearer for us down here. Testimony of a believer showing forth his faith in the crucified, buried, and risen Savior and his union with him in death to sin and resurrection to a new life. It is also a sign of fellowship and identification with the visible body of Christ. Keep this in mind. That's what he thinks of baptism. Now, compare John MacArthur answering, what is a disciple of Jesus Christ? Just keep this in mind. A person becomes a believer at salvation, and he would say a true believer. These are his words. But if you pressed him, he'd say a true believer becomes a believer at salvation. Every believer is a disciple and vice versa. Get this? Every believer is a disciple and vice versa. A careful reading of Acts shows that the word disciple has been a synonym for Christian from the earliest days of the church. So we have a believer is a disciple and a Christian. Right? Anybody disagree with my interpretation of what he's read, what he's written? Person becomes a believer at salvation. Every believer is a disciple, and vice versa. A disciple is a believer is a disciple. Am I wrong? Yeah, okay. The word disciple has been a synonym for Christian. I actually wouldn't 100% agree with that, but I'll go with it. So, in his explanation of what it means to be a literal, grammatical, historical interpretation, look what he writes. For example, consider the Great Commission. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Matthew 28:19-20. On first reading, go sounds like an imperative, as does make disciples, baptizing, teaching. But as you study the sentence, you will find there's only one imperative. Make disciples. Go. Baptizing, teaching are actually all participles, which means they modify the main verb. I would say everything that he has said, right? I say this. The central command of the Great Commission is to make disciples. How does one make disciples? Go, baptize, and teach. So he has not been consistent. But you see, he's not talking about, the context of this discussion is not what the plan of salvation is. The context of this discussion is trying to explain dispensational premillennialism and how you get there. In that he says, well, you got to be grammatically, you just take the grammar, okay? His one example of the grammar is to go to Matthew 28, where he ends up with making a disciple, which is making a believer, which is at salvation, occurs when? When you make a disciple by baptizing and teaching them. Let them talk, and then try to hold the finger down, right? They'll see it. They see it. They're not consistent.
But he will say, I mean, I've heard it many times, he will say that the person is a Christian first.
Yeah, but he's not. Right.
That is what he will say.
Disciple
Down
and...
here-
right, so he'll say...
Down here at the bottom, he would say that the Christian, no, not...
Yes, but up here at the top, he says the
I
opposite.
understand what you're saying, but I've heard it.
Well, sure. And now I'm reading them. My only point is, he's not consistent. Now, so he's a smart guy. And I learned from him some things. The danger is what? That Lee also is inconsistent. So I gotta look out for me. And as a teacher, as we all need to be aware and looking, just look for this. Look for the inconsistency. Give him time, talk, and look for the inconsistency. Okay, we spent a lot of time on there. We got to baptism from Ezekiel chapter. Pretty impressive, huh? Okay. Okay.
I'm impressed.
Yes. Comment or question, anybody on this? All right. Ezekiel 31. This is the second against Egypt in the 11th year. So this is something like June 21st, first day of summer, something like that, right? In the third month, in the first of the month. The word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, say to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his hordes, whom are you like in your greatness? You're great. Who are you like? And then he'll answer. Verse 3, behold, Assyria. Now remember that by this time, Nebuchadnezzar is ruling, which means his father and Nebuchadnezzar have already beat up Assyria. Assyria is done. We'll never read of Assyria again, essentially not to the same power that they had. So Assyria was a cedar in Lebanon, with beautiful branches and a forest shade, and very high, and its top was among the clouds. The waters made it grow. The deep made it high. And its rivers, with its rivers, it continually extended all around its planting place. It sent out channels to all the trees of the field. Therefore its height was loftier than all the trees of the field, and its boughs became many, and its branches long, because of many waters as it spread them out. All the birds of the heavens nested in its boughs, and under its branches all the beasts of the field gave birth, and all the great nations lived under its shade. So it was beautiful in its greatness, in the length of its branches, for its roots extended to many waters. The cedars of God's garden could not match it. The cypresses could not compare with its boughs, and the plane trees could not match its branches. No tree in God's garden could compare with it in its beauty. I made it beautiful in the multitude of its branches, and all the trees of Eden, which were in the garden of God, were jealous of it. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, because it is high in stature and has set its top among the clouds, and its heart is haughty in its loftiness, therefore I will give it into the despot of the nations. He's going to hand it over to Babylon. That's what happened to Assyria. Assyria was handed over to Babylon. But he's actually talking about Egypt. Egypt, you think you're so great? Go look at Assyria. What happened to Assyria? Now I'm going to skip down to 15. On the day when it went down to Sheol, I caused lamentations. I closed the deep over it and held back its rivers, and its many waters were stopped up. And I made Lebanon mourn for it, and all the trees of the field melted away on account of it. And I made the nations quake at the sound of its fall, when I made it go down to Sheol with those who go down to the pit. And all the well-watered trees of Eden, the choicest of the best of Lebanon, were comforted in the earth beneath. They also went down with it to Sheol, to those who were slain by the sword, and those who were its strength lived under the shade among the nations. To which of the trees of Eden are you thus equal in glory and greatness? Yet you will be brought down with the trees of Eden. to the earth beneath. You will lie down in the midst of the uncircumcised with those who were slain by the sword. So is Pharaoh and all his hordes. Egypt is done with. A couple points from this. Prideful nation, beware. Verse 10, its heart is haughty. Nation, you just got too proud. Beware. I might suggest that we as Christians always pray for humility, starting with ourselves and then this nation that we live in. Pray for humility. Prideful people, beware. I mean, really the point is, yeah, this is applicable to nations, yes. But really God's point is, hey, you people, when you read this, what does the Bible say over and over and over again about God does what with the prideful or the humble? He exalts. The New American Standard uses the word. He exalts the humble. And does it stop there? Right. He debases or lowers. So James 4, some 5 times. I think in the New Testament this is quoted or alluded to. You could say, James 4:6, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. 1 Peter 5:5, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Do not be prideful, because God will tear you down. This is an illustration of it. Assyria, you got too proud. Egypt, you got too proud. And I tore you both down. Little person out there. Don't get too prideful. In fact, I'm reminded of 2 Corinthians 12. This is where Paul knows a man who 14 years ago was caught up in the... Verse 7, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself. Apparently Paul was tempted to think, hey, I'm big stuff. I mean, who here's been, what is the word? Caught up to the third heaven. Anybody here can... That's the person who gets to win any argument, any discussion at a table. What'd you do? Oh, I had a great story about what I did. Yeah, but I've been caught up to the third heaven. Okay, nobody gets to top that. Because of that, Paul was apparently tempted to exalt himself. So God gives him a thorn in the flesh. He prayed 3 times that it would remove it. Verse 9, he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will boast about my weaknesses, so the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weakness, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So, person, whenever you hear somebody else talking about you, oh, she does this really well. You know, it might be true, but you had better be thinking, but I know my weaknesses. I know my weaknesses. And God, help me in my weaknesses. Because when I concentrate on my weaknesses and I let God work through me, that's when God is glorified, right? Others might say things, don't start to think it's true, right? Comments or questions on what we've talked about here? Yes?
I always think of 2 Corinthians 10. It must be about 12. Not that we should dare classify or compare ourselves with some who are commending themselves. And then this illustration of somebody deciding that they're doing well because they decided they're doing well. And it's the same with the nation, I think.
Yep.
How do we know we're doing all right? Well, we asked ourselves and said yes, so great.
Yeah. I mean, look at Russia after all. They're pathetic.
Which, if we can remember that, provides us for a very, very thankful opportunity when we are humbled to recognize just what a deluded situation we're living in. That is the standard.
We are not bold to class or compare themselves with some of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding. You know, I can find a lot of parents that I am a better father than. I can find them easily. And sometimes I'm tempted to think that way, aren't I? Well, I'm better than... And you know, I don't mean to be a jerk, but it's true. It's obvious, right?
Liam, right here.
Right. But when I do that, man, am I focusing on the wrong. Back in chapter 31, Ezekiel 31. Verse 6, all the birds of the heavens nested in its boughs, and the branches of all the earths of the field gave birth, and all the great nations lived under its shade. Do we read of this kind of language of a great nation who's this great tree? And this great nation is so great that all the birds come and fly on its branches. Do we read that anywhere else?
It happens not very long from here.
Daniel.
Right. It actually has already been recorded or delivered. I don't know exactly. Yeah, with Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel. Right? My point is, sometimes God, to make the same point, uses the same imagery. So expect it. And so when there's a big battle in Ezekiel, he makes that point to them. And when you read of what seems to be the exact same battle, but really it's only the same imagery, in, for example, Revelation, don't necessarily think, oh, this is talking about exactly the same thing. No, God does that. You ever notice how a tree looks like a brain? Or what I mean by that is the branches look like the blood vessels in a brain. If you haven't noticed that, you'll notice it now. Okay? The idea, this thing that gives the tree its life is a whole bunch of veins, right? And it looks to, God uses the same design over and over and over and over again. Guess what? Because it what? It works. It works. The same with the way he communicates to us. I'm going to want to tell him something in a picture. So I'm going to tell this person the same thing that I told this person the same way I told this person, right? Speaking of that, in this text, Egypt is compared to Assyria. Assyria is in this description of how wonderful they were compared to, or included in this picture is what? References to the Garden of Eden. His point is not that Assyria or Egypt was back in the Garden of Eden. His point was, you were so wonderful, and it's sarcasm, right? You were so wonderful, even the Garden of Eden looked at you and said, wow, I want to be you. That's how great you thought you were, okay? Having said that, back in chapter 28, we passed over this when we talked about Tyre. I say we passed over it. Gary mentioned it to me after class. He said, hey, you didn't talk about this. He didn't say that.
I will.
Right. He said, we were talking about this. So in verse 11, Ezekiel 28:11, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre. So chapter 31 is about Egypt and Assyria. This is about Tyre. And say to him, thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection full of... Now, I want you to look for the word Satan or devil or anything like that. Look for it. You had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the lapis lazuli, the turquoise, the emerald, and the gold. The workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of the fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. We'll stop there. You can read the rest of it. Did you hear or read on your own Satan or the devil anywhere in there? I didn't. Not in my New American Standard, and I've read it in the New King James and the King James and some other versions also, and I don't see it there. Not only do I not see it there, it says, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre. That's who the object of this, the recipient is. Now, to pick on him one last time. This is what our dispensational premillennialist will say. In his quote, his note on the whole text, this lament over the king of Tyre reached behind to the real supernatural source of wickedness, Satan. Might that be true? It might be true. But did you read that anywhere in the text? I didn't read that anywhere in the text. All I read is that this is about the king of Tyre. I'm just going to keep on reading through here. The Lord led Ezekiel to address the king as the one to be judged, but clearly the power behind him was Satan. By the way, does he see the primary point? Yes, he does. It's about the king. It's about the king of Tyre. He says it over and over and over. It's about the king of Tyre. So he gets the message. The issue comes when they get it and then they add something that is not necessarily there. That is always the issue. This phrase must be associated with Satan as one perfect. But it can also relate to the perfection in the same context of Tyre's enterprise, topmost in its trade. They were the perfect Walmart. This referred to Satan's wisdom as an angel, and to Tyre's wisdom, skill in trade. This could be Satan in the Garden of Eden, or it might refer to Tyre's king in the beautiful environment. On and on and on it goes. Again and again and again it goes, saying this is about Satan, this is about Satan, this is about Satan. But it's never in the text that it's about Satan. It's not even necessarily in the text. All the while, he sees actually who it is about. My point is this. That sure is sensational to get. Where did Satan come from? I mean, we know God created Satan, but how did he fall? Ooh, let's talk about that. I was working the fair a few years ago. A guy comes running up to me. He's a preacher. He comes running up to me and he says, I'm embarrassed that I don't know where this is. Where's that text that talks about how Satan fell? My short answer was, I know what you're talking about. I disagree with. But, oh boy, that's what we want to talk about. Yeah, it sure is sensational, but that's not what the text is about. No, the real point is, hey, don't be prideful. That's a lot harder to talk about than where did Satan come from? Number one. Number two, with this approach, getting things out of there that not even in there necessarily, you can go where? Anywhere you want to, right? So this man is the man that says, he preached a sermon that essentially every self-respecting Calvinist is a dispensationalist. Why? Because they use the exact same approach. The Calvinist and the dispensationalist. And he is both and admits it. He says, look, we use the same approach. That's why we end up with these same ideas. Okay, so they might be true, but when you examine them, you realize, no, there's nothing at the foundation of them. Comments or questions here? Yes, Dad?
Would that gentleman do the same thing with Isaiah 14 and
Yes.
Lucifer?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yep.
But
Right.
that's talking about Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar, right. In fact, the guy at the fair was looking for both passages, because they're both, right? Gary, you want to say something? No. Now, again, this is not to pick on somebody. This is to say that is it actually in the text or not? Because if it's not in the text, let's move on quickly before we get trapped in something. All right, let's go to 2 Kings 25. We've got a few minutes. We can cover a few verses. And as long as we're reading, we're being fed. And presumably, while we're discussing what we're reading, we're being fed also. Verses 3 through 7, the fall of Jerusalem and the capture of Zedekiah. 2 Kings 25. Verse 1 says, in the 9th year, then there's the siege, what happens for a little while. Verse 3, on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine of the 11th year. And that's in verse 2. The famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. You remember what Jeremiah says they were eating, some of them? They're children. They're not, right? They're eating. That's how bad it got. Now, does anybody here presume that there was one righteous person in the city of Jerusalem? Yeah, we know there was. Jeremiah. He was in the court of the guard's house, right? That's where he is. He's got no food. But I thought God promises food. Remember Matthew chapter 5 or 7, is it? It's 6. Right? Don't worry about food. Don't worry about clothing. Seek his kingdom first and his righteousness, and these things will be added to you. Jeremiah did it. Wasn't added to him. What does that say? Is this an absolute promise that God will always make sure that you have food? No. This is not an absolute promise. God will always, he'll always make sure you have what he deems is best, right? That's what, and it might be you starve to death. That might be it. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in that situation, but that might be it, because God says, look, your time is up. It's time to come to me, and this is the way I'm going to make it happen, right?
The people that were sinning were starving too.
Right.
I mean, so a faithful person in that situation, I don't know what I would do, but if I was doubting, I'd look around and go, well, I'm not being punished personally
Right.
for this because I'm doing the right thing. And
Right. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Okay. There's no food for the people in the land. Now, I'll tell you that I grew up around two people. One of them said about the other that if that person, I'll keep the gender-specific qualifiers, if that person doesn't get their lunch exactly at noon, that person becomes a little grumpy. Probably was talking about me, actually. But okay, right. So there's no food for the people. You think you got some grumpy people there? Or at least you've got some people who are what? They're not necessarily grumpy, but they are tempted to become grumpy. Because while there's no food there and all the rest of the chaos, how are they still supposed to act? Godly. Can you imagine that? Now what will that take? For Lee, who's in that situation, what's it going to take to perform acts of righteousness? And this is where this ties into what we're studying on Thursdays. Sunday. Right? They performed acts of righteousness. They were from weakness made strong. How did that happen? By faith. By faith. We can repeat that 24 times. By faith, by faith, by faith. What's God trying to say? Look, if you want to act the right way in these circumstances, this is your fight. This is your fight right now. Behave properly. It's not go out there and fight. The battle's already done, guys. Nebuchadnezzar won. I told you to go over to him anyway. The battle's over. That's not your fight right now. Right now, your fight is you've got no food in front of you. Children are dying everywhere. You don't know what's going on. You're in this situation because somebody else put you here. You'll be frustrated beyond all belief. And God says, you better act in a loving way, or you're being dragged away with a chain through your nose. Wow. And don't I have it easy, right? Jonathan.
You said, what would it take for them to act godly? It's kind of hard, probably impossible to sort of quantify the what would it take part, but it's precisely more than it would have taken for all of them to have just been godly, say from Solomon on.
Right.
When they were filthy rich, world power, people coming to them from everywhere, everything was great. And it would have been a lot easier for them to have just been good then. And I think for us, it's, if we say, well, I'm going to do good later, it's never going to, we may do good the entire time, and doing good may get harder.
Right.
But doing good is never going to get easier from us not having done it now.
Yeah.
We're never going to sit around and wait, it'll be easier then, and then all of a sudden it's easier next year. It's always going to get harder if we don't do it.
Yeah, good
If
point.
we're lucky, it may stay the same.
You're right.
Or get easier if we're very good.
Verse 4. The city was broken into, and then we'll finish here. The city was broken into, and all the men who were sissies to begin with fled by night. Is that what the text says? No. Who are the ones running? The men of war. Oh, by the way, did God predict this would happen? What's the expression he uses? One comes to my mind. Their hands would be limp, Shake, yeah, their knees would be shaking, and your hands will be limp. Your hands will be limp. Your hands will, here they are. Yeah, their knees are shaking forward as they're running out. Here are the men of war. Don't trust your strength or your wisdom. That's part of the lesson here. Oh no, God will never. Two things are going to happen. Aren't going to happen. One thing isn't going to happen. Nebuchadnezzar is not going to destroy Jerusalem. There are two reasons why. Number one, the temple, the temple, the temple. Number two, we've got fighting men. We've got these walls. It's, I can't say that word. Yes, impregnable. We can't. It's never going to happen. Never will it happen. Don't trust your own strength. Don't trust your own wisdom. Don't do it, right? People, who's going to be my friend? Who am I going to get married to? What kind of a job am I going to take? What kind of an education am I going to pursue? As we're working together as a church, how are we going to get this work done that God has given to us? Which way? I've got this brilliant idea without ever having consulted what? The who and the how and the what and the when. God says do it this way. Don't trust your own wisdom. Don't trust your own strength, which isn't strength to begin with. In the end, you're going to be running away like men of war, fleeing by night. How embarrassing that would be. Raising children, I know somebody who said, I have always done it right. Impressive. How many times did you consult this? It must be every time, right? You always open this up when you were facing that problem. Comments or questions, and then we'll be done. Last word. Jonathan.
It doesn't say anything better about the situation, but it's, I think, somewhat reasonable that, we know Zedekiah went with the men of war because they were chasing down.
Say it again.
We know Zedekiah went with the
Yes.
men of war. They're all sort of running together. If you're in this kind of situation and you're rationing food, who are the people you're going to prioritize with food? You're not going to be giving it to the guy who's only good at resoling shoes. You're going to be giving it to the king because he's the king and all the people who can fight. So they may have been the only people who even had the strength to run. Everyone else is eating their children. If you don't have a kid to eat, where are you at? You're stuck in the city when everyone comes in and swarms you.
Yeah.
So little left that, the people who were the pinnacle of fitness,
Yeah.
and they actually were fit generally back
Yep.
then, probably the only people who even can do anything. Everyone else is just sitting there like, everyone else is giving up. If you're not a fighter, you have no hope.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened in 78.
Right. In fact, I have up here final, that's with an asterisk, basically saying, look, the final for this period, it would happen again. Yeah, and that history is more thoroughly recorded and just as bad, right? Thank you for your work, and we'll break until next Thursday with this.